hands behind his back, in a gas station parking lot, in broad daylight, in front of 14 people who said nothing. Not one word. He had signed letters to the families of the fallen, handwritten, every single one. He had held 19-year-old soldiers in old field hospitals and told them they were going home. He had made decisions under pressure that most people couldn't imagine surviving, let alone making clearly. 22 years, 3 deployments, 800 soldiers who trusted him with their lives. None of it mattered in the next 6 minutes. Because the only thing that man with the badge could see was the hoodie. The handcuffs clicked. The photo of his son hit the hood of the Jeep face down. And then 14 million people watched what happened next. Every single second of it. He had commanded 800 soldiers. He had signed letters to the families of the fallen, handwritten every single one, because some things needed to be held in the hands of the people receiving them and not just read off a screen. He had held the hands of 19-year-old kids in field hospitals, told them they were home when he wasn't entirely sure they were. And now he was standing in a gas station parking lot with his hands cuffed behind his back because of a hoodie. This is that story, from the beginning. Route 58 in October looks like somebody dialed too far. The trees go yellow and rust, and a red so deep it almost looks wrong. The sky goes the color of old denim. The air smells like cut grass and diesel, and something faint so sweet underneath that you can never quite locate. Elton Graves had been driving for 6 hours and had noticed none of it. The Jeep was dark green, old. One of the door handles had been zip-tied back on after Theo tried to fix it himself at age 14, with results that were both genuinely impressive and completely wrong. Elton had never replaced it. He liked it. It reminded him that his son tried things. The clock on the dashboard said 1:47 p.m., 9 months. That's how long he'd been gone. 9 months at a forward operating base in a desert state that smelled like dust and burning diesel and nothing else. 9 months of 18-hour days and satellite calls that cut out at the worst possible moments and meals eaten standing up over a folding table because sitting felt like surrendering something. 9 months of managing logistics for 800 soldiers who needed everything right and needed it yesterday and trusted him completely to make that happen. He had made it happen every single time. His left shoulder had ached since March. He'd filed the paperwork twice. Both times it disappeared into whatever hole paperwork disappears into, and he'd stopped caring enough to file it a third time. The shoulder worked. That was sufficient. His phone was in the cup holder, face up. He'd silenced it hours ago because the notification pings had started feeling like someone tapping a finger directly on his skull. 43 unread texts, 11 voicemails, 3 emails from the base that could wait until Monday, and 2 from his mother that could but not would have to, because he was driving and she would understand. She always understood. That was its own kind of wait. He picked up the phone at a red light somewhere outside Roanoke and typed one-handed. 40 minutes out, you need anything. He set it down, waited. The light turned green. He drove. The phone buzzed against the plastic cup holder. Finally, bring food. He read it twice. Then he laughed. Not polite. Not tired. A real one, short and sudden. The kind that surprised him. The kind that came from somewhere below the chest. The kind he hadn't heard from himself in a while and hadn't realized he'd missed until it was already happening. Theo, 16 years old and operating on the firm conviction that the world existed primarily to inconvenience him, which Elton had decided was entirely age-appropriate and also consistently hilarious. The boy had his grandfather's jaw and his mother's mouth, and a brain that ran about 3 seconds ahead of everyone around him, which made him occasionally exhausting and continuously remarkable. Elton had missed him so much it had become background noise. The kind of missing you stopped noticing, because noticing it every day would make it impossible to function. So you fold it up, you put it somewhere safe, you keep moving. And then your kid texts you finally, with a period after it, like he's been waiting in mild inconvenience for 9 months, and the whole folded up thing opens at once and lands somewhere behind your sternum with more weight than you expected. 40 minutes. He could do 40 minutes. The fuel gauge had other ideas. The needle was sitting just above E, which in this particular Jeep meant it was probably already on E and had biffed for a while, because this Jeep ran optimistic the way some people do. Always slightly more confident than the situation warranted. Elton had learned this the hard way, twice. He wasn't going to learn it a third time. The sign came up on the right. Heart-fouled gas food AC. The AC was doing a lot of work on that sign. It was October, but fine. He signaled, turned. The fuel stop sat just off Route 58 like it had been dropped there by accident and nobody had gotten around to moving it. 2 pumps. A convenience store with a green awning that had seen better decades. A parking lot that had needed repainting for approximately a decade and hadn't gotten it yet. One of those places you don't choose, you just end up at. Elton pulled into pump 2, cut the engine. He sat for a moment, just sat, hands still on the wheel, eyes forward, breathing. He had for this. Had developed it over the years, over the returns, because coming back was its own thing that people who hadn't done it didn't quite understand. The going was hard, everyone knew that. But the coming back required its own adjustment, its own quiet space between what you'd been for 9 months and what you were about to be again. Father, neighbor, man who had opinions about what to watch on television. He gave himself 30 seconds. Then he got out. The air hit him cold and clean. He stretched his arms above his head. His lower back cracked twice. His shoulder did its usual low commentary. He acknowledged it and moved on. He was wearing the gray hoodie, soft from years of washing, faded at the elbows in the specific way things fade when they've been used instead of kept. The 82nd Airborne patch on the left shoulder, the Theo had ironed on himself at 12 because he'd found it in a drawer and decided it belonged on something and did not ask first. The patch was slightly crooked. Elton had never straightened it. He liked it exactly as it was. He swiped his card, started the pump, leaned against the Jeep. The lot. A white pickup truck at pump 1. A man in his mid-50s, gray stubble, Carhartt jacket, filling his tank without looking at anything in particular. A minivan with a family sticker on the back window, parked near store entrance. A woman inside scrolling her phone while 2 kids in the back seats argued in the low-key, relentless with children who had been in a car too long. Normal. A Thursday afternoon in October. Elton pulled out his phone, looked at Theo's text again, considered sending something deliberately dad-ish and slightly embarrassing back. Decided against it. The joke would land better in person. The face would be better in person. Everything about the next 40 minutes would be better in person. He put the phone in the front pocket of the hoodie. He would go inside, get water, get the peanut butter crackers in the orange wrapper that Theo had been eating since he was 9 and still pretended were just whatever. Not a preference, not a thing. Small detail. But Theo would notice. He always noticed small things and acted like he didn't, which was one more entry in the long-running list of things Elton found consistently remarkable about his son. He pushed the door open. A bell above it jingled. Inside, burnt coffee and floor cleaning and the low, steady hey-hum of a refrigerator unit working harder than it needed to. Fluorescent lighting doing what fluorescent lighting does. A rack of maps nobody bought anymore next to a spinning display of keychains shaped like the state of North Carolina. A young woman behind the counter looked up. Amber Stokes, 22 years old. Blonde ponytail, name tag slightly crooked on her blue work shirt. She had the particular alertness of someone hires into a 4-hour shift running on gas station coffee and determination. Hey there. Hi. Elton moved to the refrigerator, grabbed a water, found the cracker rack. Found the right ones. Orange wrapper, exactly where they should be. He set them on the counter. Amber glanced at the patch on his shoulder, then at his face. You military? Yes, ma'am. 82nd Airborne, stationed at Fort Liberty. Amber's expression shifted into something genuine, not the reflex politeness you sometimes got. Actually genuine. My brother just got assigned there. Infantry. He shipped out in August. Elton looked at her. How's he doing? She half smiled. Anxious. He doesn't say it, but I can tell from how he doesn't say it. Elton nodded. That's how you know he's paying attention. She looked at him for a moment, scanned the water, scanned the crackers. Thank you for your service. He picked up his things. Thank you for saying that. He meant it. He always meant it when it came out that way, genuine and not performed. He walked back out into the October air. The pump was still running, almost done. He leaned against the Jeep, cracked the water, took a long drink. The cold of it hit the back of his throat, and he closed his eyes for a half second. 40 minutes. He was thinking about the crackers, about Theo's face when he saw them. About the specific face Theo would make when he saw them, the one that meant I notice, but I'm not going to say so, which was somehow better than acknowledgement. About the fact that for 9 months he'd building a catalog of small moments like this. Things he was going to do when he got back. Watch the game on the couch. Make his mother's cornbread recipe badly. Sit in his own kitchen with coffee that came from an actual coffee maker. He was thinking about all of that. He was not thinking about anything else, which is why he didn't notice the patrol car turning into the lot, didn't see the officer step out, didn't see the belt adjustment, the neck roll, the 3 full seconds of looking before the first step. He was thinking about cornbread, and then a voice. "Sir." Elton looked up. A young officer was walking toward him from the direction of the patrol car, mid-20s. Gym-built, the 6 days a week kind, dark uniform, belt loaded with equipment, moving with the deliberateness of someone who has already made a decision and is now in the execution phase. Brett Caulfield, 26 years old, 3 years with the Greenfield Police Department, son of a retired cop, grandson of a man who'd worn a badge in this county before the interstate was built. He knew Greenfield the way you know a place you've never had a reason to leave. Its shortcuts, its rhythm, its sorted into categories he had inherited more than developed over time. When he'd looked across the lot at the man at pump 2, he had sorted. In approximately 3 seconds, before he'd said a single word, before he'd taken a single step. "That hoodie," Brett said when he reached Elton. "Where'd you get it?" Elton looked at him, steady, level. The look of a man who has heard opening lines like this before, and knows exactly what they mean. "It's mine. I'm in the Army." Brett let a half-second sit there, the kinds of pause that isn't uncertainty. "It's punctuation, you're in the Army." "Yes, sir, 82nd Airborne. I'm stationed at Fort Liberty." Brett stepped closer, close enough that Elton could smell the spearmint gum. And what rank would that be? Would that be? Elton caught it, filed it, kept his face neutral. "I'm a colonel." Brett's nose, not a laugh, not contempt, something in between that what was probably both. "A colonel, yes. You got ID. In my back pocket, my CAC card. Let me see it." Elton reached back slowly, the way you learn to move around armed men who have already decided something about you, deliberately. No sudden anything. He pulled the card and held it out between 2 steady fingers. Brett took it the way you pick up something you expect to be evidence. He looked at the photo, looked at Elton, looked at the photo again, turned it over, held it up toward the October sky like he was checking a diamond for flaws. "Could be anybody's. It has my name, my rank, my photo, my branch." Brett flicked the edge of the card with his thumbnail. "Yeah, I can read." The man at pump 1 had stopped moving, still standing at his truck with one hand on the gas cap, watching the way you watch something when you're not sure yet what category it belongs to. "I've served 22 years, Elton said. Quiet, even. The voice of a man who has delivered briefings under conditions that would make his parking lot look like a slow Tuesday, who has given news no one wanted to receive and kept his voice level all the way through it. A voice that doesn't perform calm. A voice that has simply become it over time through use. Brett looked him up and down, slowly. The inventory kind of looks that is designed to come up short on purpose. 22 years and you're filling up at a gas station in a hoodie. No uniform, no vehicle markings, nothing. Officers don't travel in uniform personal for leave. That's standard protocol. Don't lecture me on protocol. Brett's voice dropped, not louder. Lower, like a door being closed from the inside. I come from 3 generations of law enforcement. I know protocol. What I also know is that stolen valor is a federal crime. 18th U.S.C. Section 704. You know what that means. I know exactly what it means. Good. Then you know I can detain you right now. Elton's hands were at his sides. He hadn't shifted his weight, hadn't crossed his arms, hadn't done the 100 small things the body does when it's preparing to argue or run or push back. 22 years of training, not just military, life, had taught him that the single most dangerous thing that black man could do in front of a white officer who had something to prove was give him a reason. Any reason. Even a sigh counted. He breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth. "Officer, I'm asking you to verify my identity through the Department of Defense dictates. Some phone call. 30 seconds. That's all it takes. I don't need to make a phone call." Brett stepped closer. The vein in his temple was visible now. "I've got eyes. And right now my eyes are telling me be plenty. Your eyes are telling you something your system won't confirm. What did you just say to me?" "Not a question." A warning wearing a question's clothes. Verify my identity, please. Brett keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 9. I need backup at Hartfield Fuel Stop on Route 58. Possible stolen Valor. Suspect is being uncooperative. Uncooperative. Elton had handed over his ID without being asked twice, had answered every question, had not vised his foy, had not moved a single any direction. Uncooperative. He felt anger. He was past anger. Something older, something heavier, something he'd first felt at 19 in basic training when a drill sergeant called him a quota with the particular casualness of someone who'd said it before and expected to keep saying it. Something he'd felt at 25 when a superior asked if his promotion had been earned or just checked a box. At 29, when a MOF officer explained he didn't quite fit the profile of command material without ever specifying what that profile was supposed to look like. Something he had been carrying for 22 years, through 1,000 rooms and hallways and briefing halls and parking lots where someone looked at him and saw the wrong thing first. He breathed, in, out. 4 minutes later, a second patrol car pulled into the lot. Roy Pittman stepped out, late 30s, taller than Brett. Sandy's hair, cropped close, a quieter face, the face of someone who moved through situations rather than into them. He walked over with his hands loose at his sides, Ed, not the belt adjustment performance walk. Just a man walking over to see what was happening. He looked at the scene. An officer pacing in a short circuit in front of a man standing with perfect stillness next to a Jeep. He looked at the SAC card, still in Brett's hands. It's you. Run the card, Roy said. Brett didn't look at him, don't need to. Roy paused. Something moved in his jaw, like he was calculating the weight of a sentence before he committed to it. Sir, Roy said to Elton, is that your vehicle? Yes, sir. And you're claiming active duty? I am it. Colonel Elton Graves, 82nd Airborne Division Battalion Commander. You can verify in 30 seconds. Roy turned to Brett. Lowered his voice. Not enough, Brett. Maybe we run the card, make one call. I've got probable cause. A CAC card with DoD hologram is not evidence of fraud. You know that. I know what I've got. Roy looked at the card, looked at Elton, looked at the card again. Calm, something moved behind his eyes, past the professional composure, something that flickered and almost caught before it didn't. It was the look of a man who knows he is watching something wrong, who hasn't yet decided what that knowledge costs him. He looked at his shoes. Then he took one step back. One step. That was it. Elton saw it. He'd seen it before. The good ones going quiet, the reasonable ones finding somewhere else to look. In some ways, that was the hardest thing to stand across from, because you couldn't argue with it. You couldn't confront silence. Silence just absorbed everything you threw at it and gave nothing back. Across the street, a teenager had his phone up. Grady Tillman was 17 years old and had been waiting for the Route 58 bus for 11 minutes. His earbuds were in, but his music wasn't playing because he'd run out of data 3 days ago and hadn't topped up yet. He wore them so people would leave him alone. He'd pulled out his phone before he fully understood why. He watched through the screen. The man at pump 2, standing perfectly still. The cop doing the forward lean thing, the compressed posture of someone waiting for permission to escalate. The second cop standing slightly behind and to the left, like he was trying to find a position that didn't mean anything. Grady zoomed in slightly, the patch on the man's left shoulder. He'd seen that patch before, not on a uniform, on a man in a gymnasium at his school's JROTC graduation ceremony 2 years ago. A man, Frank, who had stood at the front of the room in full dress uniform and given a speech that didn't sound like a speech because it was too direct for that, too personal. Like someone was actually talking to specifically and not performing for the room in general, who had shaken Grady's hand afterward, who had looked him directly in the eye. You've got something, he had said. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Grady had written that on the inside front cover of his chemistry notebook, because chemistry was the class where he most needed a reminder that he was capable of things. He looked at the patch, looked at the man, switched to landscape mode, pressed live. Back at pump 2, Brett had finished waiting for the consideration to go the direction he wanted it to go and had decided to take it there himself. Sir, I need you to put your hands on the vehicle. Elton looked at him, the full look, the one that had 22 years behind it. 3 deployments, 800 soldiers, 2 Bronze Stars, and 1 Legion of Merit he kept in a drawer because he didn't like talking about it. all the rooms and hallways and parking lots, and every single time someone had looked at him and seen the wrong thing first. The look that said, I know exactly who I am, even if you don't. Then he put his hands on the Jeep, flat on the warm metal of the hood. He could feel the heat still trapped from driving. He could feel the ridges of the paint under his fingertips. He focused on that, the texture, the warmth. Something solid while everything behind him went sideways. Brett stepped up close, too close. Spread your feet. Elton adjusted his stance. The pat-down started. Not the way you search a person, you suspect of something. The way you handle something you've already made up your mind about. Hands moving these steps on the sides, across the waist, along the pockets, longer than procedure. Deliberate in the specific way that means it's designed to be experienced, not just completed. Elk kept his hands flat on the hood, kept his breathing even. He had been certified in detainee handling in 3 different training environments. He knew to the second how long a lawful pat-down was supposed to take. This wasn't that. What's in your pockets? Phone. Wallet. Brett pulled the phone out, looked at the screen. Theo's text was still the most recent notification. Finally. Bring food. Brett made a sound. Short. Dismissive. Set the phone on the hood of the Jeep. The screen cracked against the metal. A thin diagonal line opened from one corner through Theo's words. Elton's hands stayed flat. Brett pulled the wallet, flipped through it the way you flip through something when you're looking for what you've already decided is there. Military credit union card, Georgia driver's license, a worn receipt from a diner in Virginia, and a photograph. He pulled it out, held it up. Who's this? My son. At what? My promotion ceremony. When I made colonel. Brett looked at the photo. Theo at 14 years old in his JROTC dress uniform. Chin up, shoulders square, eyes forward. One hand raised in a salute so precise it looked practiced, because it had been. The expression on his face entirely serious in the way of a teenager who has decided this moment matters and is going to honor it properly. On the back of the photo, in Elton's handwriting, my son. He'll go further than I did. Brett didn't turn it over. He tossed the wallet onto the hood. The photo slid out and landed face down on the gray metal. Theo's face, hidden against the paint of a gas station parking lot in Greenfield, North Carolina, while Hal's father stood 3 feet away with his hands flat on the hood. Elton stared toward the surface of the hood. Breathed. Brett moved around to the rear door of the Jeep. Officer, you cannot search my vehicle without a warrant or my consent. Elton's voice was flat. Not pleading, not threatening. Factual in the way of someone who knows the law better than the person currently breaking it. Probable cause, Brett said. Suspected fraud. I don't need your permission, sir. He opened the rear door, reached in, pulled out the olive duffel from the back seat, unzipped it. Inside, Army combat uniforms, folded with the precision that comes from so many years of doing it that the muscle memory runs independent of conscious thought. Name tape on each one. Graves, rank insignia on the collar, the silver eagle of a full colonel sitting on top catching the flat October light. Brett stared at it. He dug further. A leather portfolio, dark brown, worn at the corners in the way of something that had been opened and closed in important rooms many times. He opened it. Official transfer orders, stamped, signed. A letter of commendation from a 2-star general on official Army letterhead with a unit seal pressed into the paper. And beneath that, the Bronze Star citation. 2 full pages, single-spaced, in the formal language of military documentation that described specific actions in a specific location on specific dates with specific outcomes. Brett started reading. He got through the first 3 lines. He stopped. Roy had moved closer without quite deciding to. He was reading over Brett's shoulder. His face changed as he read, the flicker behind his eyes sharpening from doubt into something that might have been dread if he'd let himself feel it completely. Brett. Roy's voice came out low and careful. That's a Bronze Star citation. That's a 2-star general's signature on official Army letterhead with a unit seal. That's Brett shoved the portfolio back into the duffel, zipped it fast, shut the door hard enough that the Jeep rocked once on its suspension. He turned back to Elton, who had not moved, had not turned around, had not flinched at the slam. Roy took 1 step back, then stopped, like he caught himself. But the step had happened. Elton heard it. He didn't need to see it. All right, Brett said. He unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. The metal caught the clap and threw it back. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Elton turned, slowly, deliberately. He looked at Brett Caulfield directly, possibly for the first time since this had started. Looked at him the way you look at something you are trying to understand, not in order to argue with it, but simply to see it clearly. Not anger. Pity. Real pity. The kind that doesn't perform itself. The kind that sees the full dimensions of a person and recognizes the waste of it. It was probably the worst thing he could have communicated. Worse than argument. Worse than resistance. Because Brett, on some level, knew the difference between the two. He could see it in the man's his eyes, and it didn't stop him. And Elton watched him not stop. Brett grabbed his left wrist, then his right. The cuffs clicked into place, tight, a degree tighter than procedure required. The metal bit into the skin just above where his watch usually sat, the one he'd worn through all 3 deployments. You have the right to remain silent. I know my rights, Elton said. Quiet. Even. Better than you know yours. Across the frosty street, Grady had been live for Foxwent's 2 Gisty 2s. His hands were steady. He hadn't zoomed in or out since he started, hadn't narrated anything, hadn't asked questions or commentary. He was holding the phone level and still, the way his film teacher had said to hold a camera when what you're filming matters. Like evidence. Because that's what it was. The live counter in the corner of his screen read 8:47. He kept filming. The woman in the minivan had her window all the way down now. Her oldest kid, maybe 8, had pressed his face against the glass, and she pulled him gently back and kept filming with her free hand. The man in the Carhartt jacket had replaced his gas cap. He stood by his truck for a moment, looking at what was happening in the lot. Then he got in, started the engine, checked his mirror as he pulled out and drove away. He didn't want to be a witness. He just wanted to not be here anymore. Amber Stokes was standing in the doorway of the convenience store, both hands around her phone so hard her knuckles had gone pale, eyes red. She hadn't moved since Brett reached for his belt. She hadn't been able to. But her thumb was moving. She was dialing. Brett steered Elton toward the cruiser. Elton walked, chin level, spine straight, the walk of a man who has walked through things that would have ended other people and is still walking. He should see his Jeep from here. The phone on the hood with the cracked screen. The wallet. The photograph of his son face down on the gray metal, face hidden against the paint. He thought about asking Amber to turn it over, to keep it safe until he could come back. He didn't. He wouldn't give Brett one more thing to work with. So he walked. The October wind picked up, pushed a plastic cup across the lot in a slow circle. Somewhere behind the store, a dog barked twice and went quiet. The clouds had moved together. The light had gone flat. Brett keyed his radio. Dispatch, suspect is in custody. Transporting to station. Stolen Valor. Possible fraud. Possible stolen documents. Stolen documents. He had added a charge. Because the evidence that proved Elton Graves was exactly who he said he was, Brett Caulfield had decided, was now evidence of something else. The dispatcher's voice came back routine and bored. Copy that, Unit 9. Elton closed his eyes, just for a second. He could still hear the sound of a forward operating base in the early morning. Rotors, radio chatter, the particular rhythm of 800 people moving with collective purpose. He opened his eyes. He had made it through things that had bent harder men in half. He could make it through a parking lot on Route 58. Grady Tillman's live counter read 4,300 and was still climbing. He kept his phone level. He kept filming. And then Brett Caulfield was walking back toward Cruiser with his keys out and his hand on the door when his radio crackled. Not dispatch. Something different. A channel that didn't usually carry this kind of voice at this time of day. Unit 9, hold transport. Do not leave the scene. Hold transport. Brett slowed, frowned at the radio, keyed the mic, Kappa, dispatch. What's the situation? Standby, patching house use, static. Then a voice. It didn't need to be loud. It had never needed to be loud. It had the particular weight of a voice that had given consequential orders in consequential rooms for 31 years and had long since stopped needing volume to be heard. This is Brigadier General Dale Whitmore, United States Army, Fort Liberty. Who am I speaking with? Brett's hand tightened on the radio. His other hand, the one on our went still, Officer Brett Caulfield. Greenfield, PD, sir. Officer Caulfield. A pause. The kind that isn't hesitation. The kind that is deliberate. I'm going to say this one time. The parking lot had gone completely silent. The woman in the minivan had put her phone down. One hand on the wheel. One hand on her son's shoulder. Not filming anymore. Listening. You have in your custody Colonel Elton Graves of the United States Army. He is the battalion commander of the 3rd Brigade, Combat Team, 82nd Airborne Division. He has 22 years of distinguished service, 3 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, a Legion of Merit. He is not a fraud. He is not a criminal. He is one of the finest officers I have had the privilege of serving alongside in 31 years of service. The radio hissed softly. The awning above the store entrance creaked in the wind. Do you understand what I just told you, officer? Brett's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His knuckles on the radio had gone white. Yes. Yes, sir. Good. Here is what happens next. You are going to remove those handcuffs from Colonel Graves immediately. You are going to return every item of his personal property. And then you are going to contact your commanding officer and inform him that the United States Army will be filing a formal complaint with your department, your county, and the Department of Justice. Are we clear? The dog behind the store had gone quiet. Plastic cup had caught against the base of the pump and stopped moving. Grady counter read 43,000 and the numbers were moving too fast to read individually. Are we clear, Officer Caulfield? Yes, sir. We're clear, then move. Brett clipped the radio though back to his belt. His hands were shaking. Not dramatically. Not the way it gets shown in movies. Just a small, steady tremor at the fingertips that he could feel, but couldn't stop regardless of how hard he gripped anything. He turned around and he walked toward Elton Graves, each step a little slower than the last. Like the distance between the cruiser and the Jeep heap had become something that required more from him than just his legs. Like crossing it was going to cost him something he hadn't budgeted for, and he was only now calculating what it was. He stopped in front of Elton. Selton was standing with his hands cuffed behind him, chin level, eyes forward. He had not moved, had not shifted his weight or turned his head during the entire radio call. He had simply stood there and waited with the patience of a man who has waited through worse and knows the difference between a situation that requires action and one that requires stillness. Brett reached, thugged him, found the key, missed the lock, missed it again. On the 3rd try, and the cuffs came open with a click that was very loud in the very quiet parking lot. Elton brought his hands forward. Slowly, he rubbed his left wrist. A thin red line circled the skin where the metal had been. The kind of mark that would be gone by morning. The kind that would stay somewhere else much longer than that. He turned around. He looked at Brett Caulfield standing there with the handcuffs in one hand and the key in the other, and no badge and no certainty and nothing left of the 3 seconds of decision-making that had started all of this. Brett looked smaller, not in height, in something harder to put a word to. Like the uniform was wearing him now instead of the other way around. Like the authority had been a thing he was holding and had just put down and wasn't sure what to do with his hands. Stopped! I need to, he said. Stopped again. I'm sorry. The words come out the way words come out when they've never been said before, and the context being said. Dry, not a son of their own weight. Elton looked at him for a long moment, not with triumph, not with relief, not with the satisfaction of being proven right, which he had known he would be from the beginning, with something that had no performance in it at all. You didn't verify, 3 words, quiet, final, the whole case in 3 words. Then he turned away. He walked down the hood of his Jeep, picked up his phone, looked at the crack running diagonally across the screen, one clean line from corner to corner through Theo's text, picked up his wallet, opened it, found the photograph. He turned it face up. Theo in the JROTC uniform, chin up, eyes straight, hand raised, the look of a boy who had decided Desert in this moment deserved his full seriousness and was giving it. Elton looked at the photo for a moment, then he slid it back into the wallet, closed it, put it in his pocket. He got in the Jeep, started the engine, adjusted the mirror. He did not look at Brett Caulfield standing alone in the lot with the cuffs still in his hand. Did not look at Roy Pittman by his cruiser with his arms fallen to his sides. Did not look at the phones. Did not look at any of the people who had been watching. He signaled, pulled out onto Route 58, turned north. 40 miles to home. 40 miles to Theo and the crackers and the text with a period after finally, and the couch and the game and the shower and the bed that had been waiting empty for 9 months. He drove. Behind him in the lot of the Hartfield fuel stop, Brett Caulfield stood in the October wind and did not move for a very long time. Across the street, Grady Tillman lowered his phone. The counter had passed 61,000. He stood on the sidewalk with his earbuds in and his music still not playing, the chemistry notebook in his jacket pocket, and he looked at what he had just filmed for a long moment. Then he looked at the inside cover of the notebook in his memory. You've got something. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. He put his phone away. He thought about what it meant to hold something level when everything around it was tilting. He was still thinking about it when the bus finally came. Brett Caulfield drove back to the station with both hands on the wheel. 10 and 2. Exactly. He hadn't driven like that since his road test at 17. But his hands need somewhere to be, and the wheel was the safest option because the alternative was watching them shake against the fabric of his uniform pants, and he wasn't ready to look at that yet. The radio stayed quiet the entire drive back. Nobody checked in. Dispatch didn't call. The silence on the frequency had a quality to it. The quality of people on the other end who already know something and are waiting for you to catch up. Brett had been a cop long enough to recognize that kind of silence. He just hadn't ever been on side of it before. He turned onto Garrison Street at 3:14 p.m., pulled into the department lot, cut the engine. The dashboard clock ticked to 3:15. He thought about staying in the car, just long enough to figure out what his face was supposed to do when he walked through that door. What version of the next 10 minutes he could move through without it becoming the thing it was clearly going to become regardless of what his face did. There wasn't a version like that. He got out. The front desk was Sergeant Lina Torres. 15 years with the department. The kind of institutional memory that absorbed everything and forgot nothing. She looked up when the door opened. She didn't say anything. That was the thing. She just looked at him with the expression of someone who had watched the video and was now some watching the video walk through the door to a tired recognition. The look of someone thinking again. Here we are again. Brett walked past her down the hall. Captain Webb Stanton's office door was open, blinds drawn, overhead light on. Stanton was standing behind his desk with his arms crossed and his reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead. 61 years old, 28 years in law enforcement, the build of a man who had been genuinely fit once and was now simply solid in the way of someone who'd stopped fighting what time does and made peace with it. He was standing still in the way of a man who had been waiting and had prepared himself for this particular waiting. On his monitor, Grady Tillman's live stream was paused. Frozen at the moment the cuffs clicked into place. Brett in the frame, face set, jaw forward. The look of a man who had decided something and was executing on it. Elton Graves in the frame, hands behind his back, face turned slightly to one side, the look of a man who had been through worse and was filing this in the appropriate category. Sit down. Brett sat. Tell me what happened. I observed a male individual wearing military insignia at the Hartfield fuel stop on Route 58. I had reasonable suspicion to believe. Stop. Stanton held up one hand. Flat. Final. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had the quality of a voice that had delivered hard news in small rooms, enough times that it no longer required volume to carry weight. I've watched the video, all of it, 14 minutes. I've also pulled your body cam footage from both angles. Both tell the same story. Neither one supports what you were about to say. Brett's mouth closed. Stan sat, took his glasses off, set them on the desk, rubbed the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers in the way of a man who has been doing this long enough to know the difference between mistakes that can be recovered from and mistakes that cannot. He was looking at one that couldn't. You detained an active duty colonel in the United States Army. He lets that sit for a moment, just a sense, alone in the room. You accused him of stolen valor without running a single verification check. You searched his vehicle without a warrant or documented consent. You ignored a valid SAC card carrying a Department of Defense hologram. You ignored a Bronze Star citation bearing a 2-star general's signature. You ignored official transfer orders with a unit seal. And when Officer Pittman suggested you call it in, you refused. Each one landed separately. No editorializing, no inflection. Just the list, sentence by sentence, like nails being driven. Brett's leg bounced once under the desk. He stopped it deliberately. You didn't make mistakes, Stanton said. You made choices. At every single point where a reasonable officer would have stopped, you kept going. And now I have a brigadier general on record, a video that is currently sitting at just under 200,000 views, and the NAACP has already contacted the county. The number hit Brett somewhere low. 200,000. He'd known the video was out there. He hadn't let himself look at the numbers. The number, being said out loud in this room, was different from abstractly. It had weight. It had a specific gravity. Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay. Badge and service weapon. Stanton held out his hand. Palm up. The gesture of a man who has done this before, who finds no pleasure in it, and who is not going to make it easier than it is. Brett reached up, unclipped the badge from his chest. It was heavier than it had felt for 3 years of wearing it, or maybe it had always been this heavy and he'd simply stopped noticing. He set it in Stanton's palm. Then the gun. The metal made a dull sound against the wood of the desk. Something ending. That's what that sound was. Pittman, Brett said. His voice came out rough at the edges. Stanton looked at him. Pittman is being formally reprimanded for failure to intervene. He keeps his position, probationary period. Internal Affairs will interview you both separately this week. Brett nodded at the desk surface. Go home, Stanton said. Don't talk to the press. Don't post anything. And Brett looked up. Get a lawyer. You're going to need one. He stood. His legs felt disconnected in the way legs feel when the body is running on something other than normal function. He walked out past Torres, who was looking at her monitor, and not at him, which was somehow harder than if she'd stared. Past the break room, where 2 officers went quiet the moment he appeared in the doorframe. Past the department mission statement on the bulletin board. Integrity, accountability, service. Blue letters on white laminate. He pushed through the front door into the parking lot. Dark now. The October sky had gone from denim to ink while he'd been inside. His cruiser was gone, impounded for evidence review. His personal car was a gray Civic in the back row, 3rd space from the left, the same space every shift because some habits run so deep you stop questioning them. He sat in it for 12 minutes before he started the engine. He drove home on the automatic pilot of a familiar route, parked in front of his building, went inside without turning on the lights. Sat on the couch in the dark and looked at the far wall, and thought about driving past the fuel stop on Route 58 on the way home, and what it had looked like in the headlights. The green awning, the 2 pumps, the parking lot still waiting on the repaving it had needed for years. He hadn't meant to drive past it. The route just went that way. He sat on the couch until well past midnight. He did not open his phone. He did not call his father. He thought about the step backward Roy had taken. The specific physical fact of it. 1 step. And then he thought about the fact that he, Brett Caulfield, had not taken a step backward at any point in the preceding 40 minutes. And he sat with what that meant. 40 miles north and across town, in a house with a dark green Jeep in the driveway, Elton Graves was sitting at his kitchen table. Theo was across from him. They had missed the window for the dinner Elton had been thinking out since Virginia, so they were eating reheated leftovers that Theo's grandmother had left in the refrigerator before she went home. Some kind of rice dish that was better than anything Elton had eaten in 9 months, regardless of how it had arrived. Theo ate with the focused efficiency of a teenage boy and did not ask about the cracked phone screen sitting face up on the counter. Did not ask about the red mark on his father's wrist that was already fading. Did not ask about any of it. He asked about the base, about the food, about whether Elton had remembered to bring back the specific brand of hot sauce he'd mentioned, wanting in June. Elton had remembered. They ate. Outside it started to rain, the soft October kind that didn't commit to anything, just came down quietly and steadily and made the street look clean in the porch light. Elton thought about the photograph of Theo face down on the hood of the Jeep. He thought about it, and then he put it somewhere he could come back to later, the way he put all of it, the whole afternoon, some accessibles, but not immediate. There was a version of tonight that was just dinner. He was going to have that version if he could. Theo looked up at him at some point and said,
"You good, not a question exactly, more a check."
The specific check of someone who knows something happened and is offering a door. Elton looked at his son. "Getting there," he said. Theo nodded, went back to eating. That was enough. The investigation opened within 48 hours of Internal Affairs, Kiss 1A to 2024's at 0312. The file was substantial before the first interview was conducted, because when investigators pulled Brett Caulfield's personnel record, they found something that should have functioned as an alarm at least twice before now and hadn't. 4 prior complaints, all filed, all reviewed, all closed. The first came 18 months into Brett's time with the department. Leonard Pruitt, 44 years old, owner of a landscaping company operating out of Greenfield for 11 years. He'd been pulled over on Route 58 for a broken taillight. What should have been 5 minutes became 40. Brett searched the truck bed, asked Pruitt to account for the origin of his equipment, asked him to demonstrate ownership of his own business vehicle. Pruitt filed the complaint the same afternoon in language that was precise and exhausted in equal measure, the salve someone who had needed to be precise about things like this before and had gotten very practiced at it. Reviewed. Insufficient evidence. Closed. The second complaint was filed by the mother of a 17-year-old named Devin Marsh, who had been stopped on his bicycle 2 blocks from his own house because he allegedly matched the description. Devin's mother wrote the formal complaint herself. 3 pages. She included exact quotes. She included the time down to the minute. She included the name of a neighbor who had watched the entire stop from her front porch. The neighbor had not been contacted during the review. Reviewed. Insufficient evidence. Closed. The third complaint came from a couple named Reza and Nadia Karimi, who had stopped at a rest area on the county line during a road trip from Charlotte to visit family in Maryland. Brett had approached their car, separated them into different areas of the parking lot, and questioned each of them individually about their travel plans, their employment, their reason for being in Greenfield County. The encounter lasted 26 minutes. Both Karimis submitted written statements. The statements matched each other precisely on every detail. Reviewed. Insufficient evidence. Closed. The fourth complaint was from Dorothy Sims, 67 years old, who had been sitting in her car in front of her own house on Caldwell Street when Brett pulled up and asked her to prove she owned the vehicle. She had lived in that house for 31 years. She went inside and found the title and brought it back out and walked and watched Brett examine it for 2.5 minutes was before he handed it back without a word and drove away. Reviewed. Insufficient evidence. Closed. 4 complaints. 4 separate reviews by 4 separate reviewing officers. 4 times the department had looked at the same record and determined there was no record worth looking at. Claudette Norris found the complaint files on day 3. She was in her office in Raleigh at 11 p.m. with a cold cup of coffee at her elbow, and the particular focused energy that comes from being very skilled at something and very angry about having to use that skill for the same category of reason again. She had spent 12 years as a JAG officer before transitioning to civil rights law, which meant she understood military structure, legal infrastructure, and the specific interior architecture of institutions when they were protecting themselves instead of the people they were designed to protect. She had called Elton on the evening of day 1. He'd answered on the second ring. "Colonel Graves, my name is Claudette Norris. I think we should talk." There had been a brief pause then. I was wondering how long that was going to take. She had liked him immediately, and that had not changed. On day 3, the 4 complaint files were open in front of her, and she was building the structure of what she'd built before, in different rooms with different names on the paperwork, but always the same fundamental architecture. 1 officer, 1 pattern, multiple people, multiple reviews that somehow arrived at Dr. Edigbummer. And somewhere above all of it, a decision-maker whose signature appeared on each closed file. She kept looking. On day 4, she found it. A phone record pulled as part of the broader document request. After the 3rd complaint was filed, after the review had determined insufficient evidence, a call had been placed from Captain Webb Stanton's desk line to the personal cell phone of William Caulfield. Retired Sergeant William Caulfield, Brett's father. The call lasted 11 minutes. There was no record of its content. There would never be a record of its content. But 11 minutes after that call ended, William Caulfield had called his son. And 48 hours after that, the 3rd complaint had been formally closed with Stanton's signature on the bottom of the last page. Claudette wrote 1 word in her legal pad: systemic. Then she went back to work. The full federal civil rights complaint ran 41 pages. It named Brett Caulfield individually for the conduct at the fuel stop. named Roy Pittman for failure to intervene, named the Greenfield Police Department for systemic negligence in complaint processing, named Greenfield County for inadequate training and oversight structures, cited the 4 prior complaints in full, cited the phone record between Stanton and William Caulfield, cited every second of body cam footage and every second of Grady Tillman's video and General Whitmore's radio call and the Bronze Star citation and the transfer orders and the CAC card and the cracked phone screen and the photograph of Theo face down on the hood of a Jeep. 41 pages. Filed on the morning of day 5. Landed simultaneously on decks in Raleigh, in Washington, and in the Greenfield County Attorney's office. By that afternoon, the county attorney had canceled 2 meetings to read it. Roy Pittman had driven past the Hartfield fuel stop on his way home the night of the incident without meaning to. The route just went that way, and he was halfway past it before he registered what it was. The green awning, the parking lot. He kept driving without slowing, but something in his chest registered the passing, some say specific weight that settled and didn't lift. He got home. The house was quiet in the deliberate way, the kind of quiet a person who lives with you creates when they're waiting for you to say something first. His wife, Denise, was in the kitchen. Their daughter was asleep in the back room. Denise heard him come in and looked at him across the kitchen, and whatever she saw in his face told her something had happened before he said a word. He sat at the kitchen table, told her everything, not a version of it. Not the version where the reasonable explanations for each choice got a little more airtime than they deserve. The whole thing, including the part where he had read the Bronze Star citation with his own eyes and seen the 2-star signature and looked at Elton Graves, standees at his own car in his own clothes, being accused of fraud and taking it 1 step backward. Denise listened without interrupting. The only sound was the rain outside and the small sounds of the baby sleeping. When he finished, she sat for a moment. "When you read that citation," she said, "did you believe him?" Roy opened his mouth. Then he didn't say anything. Denise nodded slowly. That's your answer. She wasn't angry. That would have been simpler. She was clear, which was something else. The clarity of a woman who could see the full shape of a situation from the outside and was waiting with patience for the person inside it to see what she already saw. Roy went to bed at 10, lay awake until 2. Got up and sat at the kitchen's table in the low light. He thought about the step, not in the abstract, the specific physical act of it, his left foot moving behind him. The choice his body made before his conscious mind had finished the argument. The distance that step created between himself and what was happening. The reasons he'd given himself in the moment were still available to him. He could still access them, didn't want to escalate. Not his stop. Needed to see where Brett was going with it. Situational awareness. But Denise's question had put a hole in all of that. Did you believe him? Yes. He had believed Elton Graves from the moment he read the first line of that citation. Before that, possibly. From the moment he walked up and saw some man standing with his hands visible at his sides and his face perfectly composed in the specific ways of someone who has nothing to hide and has been here before and knows that composure is the only thing that will get him through it. He had believed him. And he had stepped back anyway. Roy Pittman, who coached youth basketball on Saturday mornings, who drove his mother-in-law to her appointments without being asked, who had 9 zers on the force without a single complaint, that Roy Pittman had believed a man was innocent and had chosen not to say so because saying so had a cost he hadn't wanted to pay in that moment. He sat with that until the kitchen got light. On the morning of day 4, same afternoon Claudette Norris was building her case in a Raleigh office. Roy got in his car. He drove to a neighborhood 12 minutes from the department, found how the address he'd looked up that morning, parked in front of a house with a dark green Jeep in the driveway. He sat for a moment. Then he got out. He walked to the front door. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, and no badge because the badge was under administrative review and also because this was not a department visit. This was not official. This was something else that didn't have an official category. He knocked. The door opened. Elton Graves stood there in a white t-shirt and sweatpants, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a coffee mug in one hand. He looked at Roy. Not hostile, not warm. The specific neutral of a man who has opened the door and is waiting to find out what's on the other side of it before he decides how to respond. Roy was holding his cap in both hands. I read the citation, Roy said. I knew, and I stepped back anyway. Not I'm sorry if you felt. Not I was trying to assess the situation, not any of the available framings that would have put distance between him and what he'd done. Just the fact of it, said directly to the person it had been done to. Elton looked at him for a long moment, the kind of moment that has genuine weight to it, that requires something from both sides. Then he stepped to the side, opened the door a little wider. Coffee's on. Roy came in. The kitchen was clean and slightly spare. The kitchen of a man who had been gone for 9 months and had come home to a house that had kept itself in order in his absence. A half-drunk pot on the counter. 2 mugs already out. Roy noticed the 2 mugs, didn't say anything about it. They sat down. Elton poured. They talked for a while about the complaint, about Claudette's filing, about what the 4 prior complaints meant in terms of what the department had known and when. Elton talked the way he did everything, with precision and without wasted motion, each sentence going where it needed it to go and stopping there. Then Roy asked about the envelope, the one Brett had found in the duffel at the fuel stop and put back without care. Elton looked at his coffee mug for a moment. One of my soldiers, he said. Corporal James Whitfield, 23 years old. He died in May. He turned the mug slightly in his hands. His mother lives here in Greenfield, 8 miles from the fuel stop. I wrote her a letter, handwritten, because some things need to be held. I was going to drive it out before I went home. Then I ended up at the department performing paperwork until 7 in the evening, and by the time I got out I didn't want to arrive at a stranger's door at that hour. He looked at Roy. I still haven't been. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up. You got the address? Elton looked at him, at this man who had stepped backward in a parking lot 4 days ago and driven to his front door this morning to say so. Yeah, Roy picked up his cap from the table. Let's go. Elton didn't move for a beat, just looked at Roy standing in his kitchen in civilian clothes, having made a choice that was small in terms of what it cost him and large in terms of what it meant. Then he stood, went to the bedroom, came back with the envelope, still sealed, his handwriting on the front. The address in Greenfield. They drove in Roy's car, 8 miles, mostly quiet, the comfortable kind, not the strained kind. The kind between people who don't need to fill space with sound. The house was small and yellow on a corner lot, flower boxes on the front windows, empty for October, a small flag by the front door. The kind veterans organizations hand out, faded enough to show it had been outside through more than one season. They parked, walked to the door. Elton knocked. A woman answered, Patricia Whitfield, late 40s. She looked at Elton first, at the gray hoodie and the patch on the shoulder, then at Roy behind him, then back at Elton, and her face did the thing faces do when something they've been waiting for finally arrives. Not relief exactly. Something that sits underneath relief. Something older. Mrs. Whitfield, Elton said. My name is Colonel Elton Graves. I served with your son. He held out the envelope. She took it with both hands, stood there looking at her name in his handwriting on the front of it. She pressed it against her chest, looked at Elton. He told her about James, not in the language of citation, not in the formal language of service and sacrifice that sounded correct and felt hollow. In the language of a man who had watched James Whitfield work for 11 months and had wanted someone who loved him to know what that work had actually looked like, the specific things. The details that don't make it into official records. She listened. She didn't say anything until he was done. Then she turned slightly and walked back inside to read the letter. The door stayed mostly open. Elton and Roy stood on the small porch. Through the gap, could see her in the front room, her back to them, standing under the lamp, the letter open in both hands. Her shoulders moved. Neither of them said anything. The dog somewhere down the street barked twice and stopped. A car went past on the cross street, headlights sweeping briefly through the gap in the door, and then it was quiet again. They waited. When Patricia Whitfield came back to the door, she looked at Elton and she said, Thank you for coming yourself. He nodded. She shook Roy's hand without asking who he was. Then she closed the door gently. They walked back to the car, got in. Roy started the engine, pulled away from the curb. Halfway, Roy said, I should have done stop this on day one, stopped it on day one. He meant the step forward instead of back. He meant the 30 seconds. Elton was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window at the October houses going past, the lit windows, the porch lights. Then he said, most people don't do it on day 4 either. Roy didn't say anything to that, but he drove the rest of the way with both hands on the wheel. The media arrived on day 3. Local affiliates first. A reporter from the Greenfield Gazette who had been covering the Dart for 6 years and had filed 3 previous stories about complaints missiles that had gone nowhere. She knew from the volume of her inbox alone that this one was different in kind, not just in degree. Then the national scene. CNN ran the segment on Tuesday evening. The anchor introduced it with 2 sentences that went everywhere within hours of airing. A 32-year Army veteran was handcuffed at a gas station for wearing his own uniform patch. The officer who detained him had 3 years on the job. He had 3 combat deployments. People grabbed those 2 sentences and moved them, posted them, printed them, put them on things, because they said something true in a way that was also very uncomfortable, and the discomfort was exactly the point, and everyone who read them knew it. As MSNBC called Claudette's office on Wednesday, she relayed the invitation to Elton. He thought about it for a day, then he said yes. He sat in the Fayetteville studio on Thursday morning, dress uniform full, every ribbon in its place. The interviewer asked how it felt. Standing in that parking lot with his hands behind his back, Elton was quiet for a moment, choosing. I felt like I was 19 again, he said. Like nothing I'd done in 22 years counted, like the uniform I'd bled for was invisible. Because the only thing he could see was my skin, and the story he'd already written about it before he said a single word to me. 12 million views in 48 hours. But Elton wasn't finished with what he needed to say. In week 3, he published an op-ed in the Post. He wrote about Leonard Pruitt and Devon Marsh and the Karamis and Dorothy Sims. He wrote about 4 complaints and 4 closed files, and a system that had looked at the same pattern 4 times. On each time, there was no pattern. He wrote about the phone call between Stanton and William Caulfield that Claudette had found. And he wrote about Roy, not with anger, with something more surgical than anger. Offer Prosa Pittman read Bronze Star citation with his own eyes, he wrote. He saw the signature, he saw the seal, he knew, and he took 1 step back. He paused for a line break. The system doesn't only fail because of those who act with malice. It fails because of those who see the malice and choose to look at their shoes. But it can be repaired. Slowly, imperfectly, by the people who find the courage to walk back through the door they should have held open. Roy read that paragraph at his kitchen table on a Thursday morning. Denise had left the paper open to the page without comment. Just left it there. He read it twice. Then he called the department training coordinator and enrolled in his first bias intervention session 3 weeks ahead of the mandatory deadline. Amber Stokes was in her 3rd week of basic training at Fort Jackson when the piece ran. She had quit the fuel stop 2 weeks after the incident, not because of anything the job had done, because of what she had seen standing in the doorway, because she'd stood there with her phone in both hands and her knuckles gone white and watched a man get handcuffed in front of her for being exactly who he said he was. And she had filmed it. That was what she'd done. She had filmed it and called her brother and then stood in the doorway and shaken. That wasn't enough. She knew at the moment the cruiser pulled out of the lot. She'd thought about it for 2 weeks. Then she'd called her brother, Marcus, a specialist at Fort Liberty, and told him what she was thinking. He'd been quiet for a moment. Then he'd asked, "You sure?" She'd said, "I've been sure since it happened. I just needed to say it out loud." She'd written Elton a letter before she shipped out. 2 pages on lined notebook paper, the kind that comes in the spiral notebooks sold at every drugstore. She told him about the day. About Clarkus the moment she saw Brett reach for his belt. About Marcus going directly to his sergeant, about not knowing if that call had made it in time or if it mattered, or if someone else had already made a different call that got there first. "I don't know if I helped," she wrote. "I don't know if it was enough. I just know I had to do something more than stand there. I keep thinking about your phone, the crack in the screen. I keep thinking I should have walked out there." She shipped out before she knew if he'd gotten the letter. Grady Tillman's video had settled at 14 million views by the time the op-ed ran. He was a freshman at UNC Charlotte, mid-year enrollment in January, studying journalism. He'd gotten into the program in the fall after submitting his application with a video sample, the specific video sample being the 14-minute Lifty stream from the sidewalk on Route 58. His application essay was 3 pages about what it meant to hold something level when everything around it was tilting. His professor had kept a copy of the essay. Grady kept his phone charged at all times. He'd started doing that the day after the live stream. He hadn't consciously decided to. He just noticed one day that he always had it all charged and he'd stopped unplugging it before it was full, and that this was something that had changed about him without him formally deciding to change it. He thought that was probably fine. Elton sat at his kitchen table on the evening the op-ed ran and read it through once to check it against what he'd intended to say. Then he put the paper down. Theo was doing homework at the other end of the table, with the performance of doing homework that involved a lot of looking at things that weren't homework. He'd read the op-ed 2 hours ago and hadn't said anything about it except "you write the way you talk." Elton had looked at him. Is that good or bad? Theo had considered its genuine seriousness. Good, he'd said, mostly. Now they sat at opposite ends of the table in the comfortable quiet of a house that was getting used to having someone in it again. The rain had stopped. The street outside was dry and orange under the streetlights. Somewhere down the block, someone's dog was having an opinion about something. Elton thought about Patricia Whitfield standing under the lamp with the letter open in both hands. He thought about 4 complaint files with insufficient evidence stamped on the bottom of each one. He thought about Roy Pittman standing at his front door with his cap in both hands, saying, "I knew," and I stepped back anyway. He thought about all of it, and he let it sit where it was, not resolved, not finished, just real and present, and something he was going to carry forward into what came next. Because what came next mattered. The disciplinary hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in November, and Claudette Norris had 41 pages ready, and the system that had closed 4 files was about to have to open its own. The disciplinary hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in November. Small room, long table. 5 members of the Civilian Review Board along one side. A court reporter in the corner, with her machine and her particular stillness. 2 windows with the blinds pulled halfway, letting in flat gray November light that hadn't subsided yet, whether it was morning or something else. Brett Caulfield sat at one end of the table in a navy suit. The crease across the front of the jacket was still sharp in the way that means it came out of a bag recently. No badge, no gun, no belt. With the weight of equipment he'd been adjusting and readjusting every working day for 3 years. He looked like a man who had been removed from the context that defined him and was discovering for the first time that there wasn't much structure underneath it holding him up on its own. His lawyer sat beside him, mid-40s, careful face. The composure of someone paid to stay level in rooms like this one. Claudette Norris sat at the other end of the table with a single legal pad in front of her and a pen she hadn't uncapped yet. The board chair was a woman named Frances Okafor, 20 years as a federal magistrate before taking the civilian oversight appointment. She had the kind of voice that made rooms quieter without raising itself. She used it sparingly and with intention. She called the session to order at 9:02 a.m. Brett's lawyer went first. He argued procedural compliance. Said Brett had acted on reasonable suspicion based on observed discrepancies between the subject's appearance and his claimed identity. Said the CAC card, while present, was insufficient standalone verification in the field. Said the pat-down fell within departmental guidelines. Said the vehicle search was covered under existence doctrine. Said his arrest, while ultimately unfoot, had been executed in good faith by an officer, responding to what he had genuinely believed was a federal crime in progress. He used the phrase good faith 4 times. The board listened without interruption. Frances Okafor nodded to the technician by the door. They played the body cam footage, all 14 minutes of it. The room watched. Brett's cameras capturing his own approach from his own chest. His opening question had delivered with the flat finality of a conclusion before Elton had said a single word. The CS card held up against the sky, the pat-down running past the 2-minute mark while Brett's hands moved with the deliberateness of performance rather than procedure. The phone set on the hood and the crack that opened across the screen. The wallet flipped through. The photograph of Theo pulled out and looked at and put back face down on the metal of the Jeep without a word. Nobody on Brett's side of the table spoke. The technician played Grady Tillman's video, the raw upload, not the edited clip that had circulated. Landscape mode, steady hands, clear audio. The kind of footage that needs no narration because it is its own narration, complete and self-evident. Then the audio recording of General Whitmore's radio call. The room heard it in full. Whitmore's voice at its measured weight. One of the finest officers I have had the privilege of serving alongside in 31 years of service. The silence on the recording after it. Brett's 2-second pause before his yes sir that sounded exactly like something giving way. Then Frances Okafor opened a manila folder. She read the four complaints aloud. One by one, beginning to end, Leonard Pruitt, Devin Marsh, Reza and Nadia Karimi, Dorothy Sims. Each complaint read in its entirety. The dates, the specific detail, the language of the complaints themselves, the particular exhaustive precision of people who had needed to document things like this before and had gotten practiced at it. The review findings, the signatures on the closed files. Brett's lawyer put his pen down after the third one. After the fourth, he didn't pick it up again. The board took a 30-minute recess. When they came back, Frances Okafor did not sit. She stood at the head of the table with the folder closed in front of her, and she looked at Brett Caulfield with the expression of a person who has measured something carefully from every available angle and arrived at a number that doesn't change regardless of which angle you use. The board's decision, she said, is unanimous. Termination, effective immediately. Permanent revocation of law enforcement certification in the state of North Carolina. Entry into the National Decertification Index, a database accessible to every law enforcement agency in every state, which would attach to Brett Caulfield's name for the remainder of any future attempt at a career in this field. No transfer option. No quiet resignation with a clean record attached. No second chance dressed up as a fresh start somewhere that hadn't heard of Greenfield yet. Brett's lawyer made a motion to pause proceedings. Frances Okafor denied it without looking up from the folder. Brett sat in the Navy suit while the room conducted its remaining business around him. The signatures, the documentation, the scheduling of follow-up interviews. He looked at the table in front of him with the look of a man whose mind is trying to go somewhere else and forgetting that there is nowhere else available. On the way out in the hallway, his lawyer said something about appeal timelines and civil exposure and recommended next. Brett nodded at the right intervals. He heard the words. None of them went anywhere in him. He walked out of the building into November air, got in his car, drove. He took a route that didn't go past the fuel stop on Route 58. He had started doing that automatically sometime in the past 3 weeks, rerouting without deciding to, the way you reroute around, thus I think that has a different kind of place than it used to be. He drove past his father's house. He hadn't meant to. The route just went that way. William Caulfield's house was a tan ranch on Birchwood, the same house Brett had grown up in, the same porch light that had been on every night of his childhood. The light was on now. The living room window was lit. The gray pickup was in the driveway. Brett pulled to the curb across the street. He sat there for a moment looking at the front door. He thought about knocking, about what the conversation would look like, what his father's face would look like, what version of this his father would find a way to frame as something other than what it was. He thought about the 11-minute phone call Claudette's complaint had uncovered. He thought about what those 11 minutes had cost Leonard Pruitt and Devin Marsh and the Karamis and Dorothy Sims and Elton Graves and everyone else whose complaint had moved through a system designed to absorb it without consequence. He sat there for 6 minutes. Then he pulled away from the curb without crossing the street. He drove home, sat in his apartment in the quiet. He thought about the look on Elton Graves's face when he'd turned around in that parking lot. He'd had weeks to identify it correctly, and he had finally gotten there. It wasn't anger, it wasn't triumph, it wasn't the look of a man who had won something. It was pity, the genuine kind, the kind that sees the full dimensions of a person and recognizes the waste of it. That was the thing that woke him up at 3 in the morning. Not the suspension, not the termination, not the 41-page complaint or the 14 million views or any of the consequences that had a number attached to them. The fact that he had seen that look and kept going anyway. He sat in the quiet apartment, and he started slowly and without any clear idea of where it was going, to think about what kind of person he was going to be in the years after this one. He didn't have an answer yet, but it was the first time he had asked the question honestly. Captain Webb Standstill submitted his retirement paperwork on a Monday morning 2 weeks after the hearing. Not fired, retired. The distinction was bureaucratic, and Claudette had addressed it precisely in a follow-up letter to the county attorney that was 3 paragraphs long and did not raise its voice once, while making entirely clear what the distinction did and did not mean in terms of accountability. Stanton cleaned out his office by Tuesday afternoon. He left no public statement. He did not speak to the press. He drove out of the department parking lot for the last time at 4:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, and nobody took a photo of it. Roy Pittman received his formal written reprimand on the same Wednesday as the hearing. He read it in his car in the department parking lot before going inside for his shift. 12-month probationary period. 80 hours of mandatory biased intervention training. Removal from active patrol pending evaluation completion. He read it twice, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. He did not fight it, did not request a review, did not make a statement to anyone inside or outside at the department. He submitted his training enrollment form the following morning, 3 weeks before the department had deadline, and requested the earliest available start date. The County Board of Supervisors held an emergency session on the Thursday following the hearing. The gallery was full in a way that county board sessions were not usually full. Community members, local press. 3 people who had driven from neighboring counties specifically for this. The session lasted 4 hours, and the gallery stayed full for all of it. The vote at the end was unanimous. Mandatory implicit bias training for every law enforcement officer in Greenfield, Kawasan. Every officer, every year. No waivers, no exceptions, no exemptions for seniority or rank. Creation of an independent civilian oversight committee with binding authority. The authority to review complaints without departmental filtering. Direct access to body cam footage. The authority to recommend disciplinary action with a required formal departmental response within 30 days. Community activists had been requesting both of those things at every relevant public meeting for over a decade. It had taken a handcuffed colonel and 14 million views to get them. One of those activists, a woman named Gloria Reese, who had been attending those meetings for 11 of those years, said at a subsequent community gathering that she was cautiously furious, not because the changes weren't real, because of what it had taken to make them real. Because of how many times the foreclosed complaint files could have been 5 and 6 and 10 before any of this happened. Claudette Norris noted Gloria Reese's comment in a follow-up memo. She was already building the next case. Not Elton, the cases she had referred on his behalf in the first week. Leonard Pruitt, Devin Marsh, the Karimis, Dorothy Sims. She had 3 colleagues on them now, and the National Decertification Index entry for Brett Caulfield was sitting in the SIFs as corroborating documentation for each one. She worked late most nights. She had always worked late most nights. That part wasn't new. Amber Stokes' letter arrived at Elton's address in the 2nd week of November. He was going through accumulated mail at the kitchen table, the deep stack of 9 months of catalogs, and forwarded correspondence, things that had piled up in his absence when he found it near the bottom. Plain white envelope. His name and address in careful handwriting. Fort Jackson return of address, which he recognized before he opened it. He opened it. 2 pages, lined notebook paper. The handwriting of someone who had written and rewritten and finally just committed to the version in front of her. She told him about the day at the fuel stop, about standing in the doorway when the cuffs came out, about the phone shaking in her hands and her knuckles going white on it, about calling her brother Marcus the moment Brett reached for his belt before the handcuffs had even cleared the holster, because she had known in that instant what was going to happen next, and there was nothing she could do about it from 30 feet away, except get someone on the phone who might be able to do something from somewhere else. Marcus was a specialist at Fort Liberty. He'd answered on the 2nd ring. She'd said 3 sentences. He'd hung up without responding and gone directly to his sergeant. His sergeant had escalated it up the chain within 6 minutes because it was the kind of thing you escalated without waiting for authorization. I don't know if it was me, she wrote. Maybe Masamos got there first. Maybe the video was enough on its own and my call didn't change anything. But I had to do something. I couldn't just stand in the doorway with my phone shaking. I keep thinking about your phone, the crack in the screen. I keep thinking I should have walked out there and said something, and I didn't, and I have to live with that. Then, below a short gap on the page, I enlisted 3 weeks ago. I shipped to Fort Jackson on the 14th. I don't entirely know why, except that I do know why. I just don't have language for it yet. That doesn't sound like I'm making too much of a moment that wasn't even about me. Maybe it was about me a little. Maybe watching something happen in front of you and not knowing what to do with your hands is a feeling you have to do something about. I hope this letter finds you well. I hope you made it home okay. Elton read the letter through twice. He sat for a moment with it on the table in front of him. Then he got a piece of paper and a pen. He wrote slowly, the way he wrote the letters to families, each word chosen for what it actually was rather than what was close enough. You weren't standing in a doorway. You made the first call. There's a difference between watching something happen and deciding that watching isn't enough. Most people never figure that out. You figured it out in about 45 seconds in a gas station doorway. Don't forget it. He sealed it, addressed it to Fort Jackson, left it on the counter by the door. Theo found it the next morning on his way out and mailed it without being asked, which was the kind of thing Theo did that Elton noticed every time and stored somewhere. The forum was held on a Friday evening in the Greenfield Municipal Center. Building B, the large meeting room with the folding chairs and the projection screen that still is a smudge on the left side from a presentation nobody remembered anymore. The chairs were filled by 6:45. People standing along the walls by 7. Local press along the back with cameras. 2 county supervisors in the third row trying to occupy the ambiguous middle ground between attendance as officials and attendance as citizens. Officers from the Greenfield PD filled the front 2 rows. Some of them had come because the department memo had made attendance feel strongly advisable. Some had come because they wanted to hear it directly from the person it had happened to. A few of them, more than the room expected, had come because they needed to be there in a way that had nothing to do with obligation. Elton Graves stood at the podium in dress uniform, full, every ribbon in place. The colonel's eagle on the collar, the 82nd Airborne patch on the left shoulder, the beret positioned exactly where it had been positioned for 22 years. No notes. He looked out at the room and let it settle for a moment. The particular quiet that comes when a room understands that what it's about to hear is meant for it specifically and not for a general audience. I'm not here to punish anyone. His voice was the voice that had given briefings in difficult places and delivered news that changed people's lives and held the hands of 19-year-old soldiers in field hospitals. Not loud, not performing, just direct. I'm not here because I want a room full of people to feel bad. I'm not here because I think standing at a podium fixes anything by itself. He paused. I'm here because what happened to me at a gas station in October wasn't new, wasn't rare, wasn't one officer having one bad afternoon. It was the 5th time, and the 4 times before it, the file was closed every single time. The room held the quiet. He told them about Leonard Pruitt, about Devidan Marsh, about the Crimis at the rest stop, about Dorothy Sims walking back out of her own front door with the title to her own car. He told it without ornament, without building toward anything dramatic. Because the facts didn't need decoration, and giving them decoration would have been a form of disrespect to the people they had happened to. I've commanded 800 soldiers, he said. I know what it is to make calls under pressure before you have everything you need. I know what it is to act on incomplete information because the situation requires action. He looked at the front rows. That is not what happened at the Hartfield fuel stop. What happened there was a decision made before the first question was asked. I was sorted before he crossed the parking lot, and at every single moment afterward, when the evidence in front of him contradicted the decision he'd already made, he found a reason to keep going. A pause. I showed him my identification. He held it up to the sky. I told him I shrank in my unit. He said I wasn't the type. He found my transfer orders signed by a 2-star general and decided they were evidence of fraud. He found my Bronze Star citation and stopped reading after the 3rd line. He let that settle. 30 seconds. That's what verification takes. 1 phone call. 30 seconds before you decide who someone is. 30 seconds before you determine that what you're seeing is the complete picture. He wasn't performing anger. He wasn't performing anything. He was describing a situation that needed to be understood precisely, in the same register he used for everything that needed to be understood precisely. I don't need your sympathy. I need something more useful than that. I need the people in those front rows to think about the last time they made a call based on a conclusion they'd already reached. And then I need them to think about whether 30 seconds would have changed it. He looked at the room, at the officers in the front rows, some of whom were looking back at him and some of whom were looking at the table, which he didn't take as disrespect. He took it as the look of people doing the internal thing, the thing a room can prompt but can't complete for you. I want to say one more thing. He let a beat pass. There was an officer at the fuel stop that day who read my Bronze Star citation, who saw my transfer orders, who recognized what my CAX card was, and who took one step back. The room went to a different quality of quiet. I wrote about that because it matters, because what allows one officer to behave the way Officer Caulfield behaved across 4 years and 5 separate incidents is not only that officer. It is every person around him who sees it happening and decides it isn't their call to make. He paused. But I wrote something else alongside it, that the system can be repaired. Slowly and imperfectly, by the people who destroyed that walks back through the door that should have held open. I believe that. Not because it's a comfortable thing to believe, because I've watched it happen. In 22 years, I have seen people face the moment where they have to decide what kind of person they're going to be. Some of the best people I ever served alongside got that moment wrong the first time. He looked toward the back of the room, the ones who came back, who acknowledged it and came back and did it differently. Those aren't cautionary tales. Those are the people who actually understand what this work requires, what any of this requires. He stepped back from the podium slightly. 30 seconds, he said. That's all I'm asking. Every stop, every interaction, every moment when you're about to reach a conclusion before the evidence is in. Take 30 seconds. That's the whole thing. He stopped. The room absorbed it. One person in the back started clapping, slow and deliberate. The clapping of someone who means it, rather than the back clapping someone carried along by what everyone else is doing. Then another person. Then the room. Elton was looking toward the back when it began, which meant he had a clear view of the front rows through peripheral vision. Some of the officers joined immediately. A few held back for a beat, the kind of beat that meant they were choosing to, rather than being pulled along. And Roy Pittman stood up. 4th row. Civilian clothes, the same jeans and work jacket he'd worn to Elton's door 6 weeks ago. He hadn't come as an officer. He'd come as himself. Denise was beside him, with their daughter asleep in the carrier against her chest. She was already on her feet. Roy stood and he clapped. One person in the 4th row, in a room that was filling with sound, standing because he had decided to stand. Elton saw him. Roy met his eyes across the room. Elton gave a slight nod, the kind that carries everything it needs to carry without requiring elaboration. Roy gave it back. That was enough. That was exactly enough. Grady Tillman was in the 3rd row from the back on the left side. He'd driven 2 hours from Charlotte for this. Mid-year enrollment at UNC Charlotte Journalism started in January after his application had included 14 minutes of footage from a sidewalk on Route 58 and a essay about what it meant to hold something steady when everything around it was tilting. He wasn't filming tonight. He sat with his notebook in his jacket pocket and he listened. On the drive back to Charlotte, he kept the radio off. He thought about what his professor had said in the first week of class. That the job wasn't to interpret events for people. The job was to let people see events clearly enough to interpret them for themselves. He thought Elton would probably agree with that. He drove back to Schuchert in the Quiet and thought about the next time he would need to hold something level and steady, and how he would recognize the moment when it came, and what he would do when he did. He thought he'd probably be ready. 3 days after the forum, Claudette called Elton on a Tuesday evening. He was at the kitchen table. Theo was across from doing the performance of homework. She told him about the county board vote, the mandatory training, the oversight committee, the binding authority, all of it. He thanked her. She said it was his case that had moved it. He said, it was Leonard Pruitt's case, and Devon Marsh's, and the Karimis and Dorothy Sims, all 5 of us together. A pause on her end. I'll convey that, she said. He put the phone down. Theo looked up from whatever wasn't homework. Good news. Elton looked at his son. That's some. How much is some? Enough to matter, not enough to be done. Theo thought about that with the genuine seriousness he applied to has deserved it. Is it ever done? Elton poured more coffee. No, but it moves. You keep pushing until it moves, and then you keep pushing after that. Theo wrote something in his notebook. Elton didn't ask what. With Theo, things came back around eventually. Brett Caulfield was 27 years old and living 40 miles from Greenfield. He had applied to 9 law enforcement agencies since the termination. Each application went the same way. His name went in. The National Index, the answer came back, no, 9 times. He was working nights at a distribution warehouse outside of Statesville. Loading dock, 12-hour shifts, scanning barcodes and moving pallets and eating shinch alone in his car at 2 in the morning with the heat running, because November in North Carolina had opinions about people who underestimated it. He hadn't done any interviews, hadn't posted anything. His social media had gone dark the day after the hearing. The last post was a photo from his academy graduation. Standing in formation, dress uniform, badge just pinned on by his father, the grin of a man who thought he had just figured out exactly who he was going to be. Nobody had liked the photo in 2 months. He hadn't taken it down. He thought about it sometimes on the drive to the warehouse. About the version of himself in that photograph and the gap between that version and what the parking lot on Route 58 had revealed. About what it meant to be so certain of something that you stopped checking whether it was true. He thought about Elton Graves's face when he turned around. The pity. He was starting to understand that the pity wasn't contempt. It wasn't the pity of someone looking down. It was the pity of someone looking clearly at a situation and seeing the waste in it. The waste of potential. The waste of what the badge on his chest was supposed to mean, and what he had made it mean instead. He was working on understanding that completely. It was slow work. Some nights it felt like the only work worth doing. 6 weeks after the forum, on a clear December morning at Fort Liberty, Elton Graves stood in front of the full-length mirror in his quarters, full-dress uniform. He had been appointed to lead the Army's newly created Diversity and Inclusion Training Initiative. The program had been in discussion for 2 years. It had been approved and funded 3 weeks after the forum in Greenfield, which was not a coincidence and which nobody pretended was a coincidence. He straightened the beret, 1 centimeter above the right eyebrow, the same position it had been in for 22 years. There was a new plea patch on his shoulder alongside the 82nd, the program patch. Still requiring conscious attention when he put it on, the way new things do before they become second nature. He would get used to it. He had gotten used to everything eventually. Theo was on the bed behind him, lying back on both elbows, one ankle crossed over the other, watching his father adjust a beret, with the expression of someone who has opinions about the amount of attentions the beret was receiving, but is choosing not to share them yet. He was holding something. The photograph from the promotion ceremony, the one that had been in the wallet, the one that had been on the hood of the Jeep, face down on the gray paint of a gas station parking lot in Greenfield, while a 26-year-old officer stood 3 feet away and made decisions based on things he'd discussed before he arrived. Theo was looking at himself at 14, the JROTC uniform, the precise salute, the expression of a boy who had decided the moment mattered and was going to automatically. "You nervous?" Theo said. Elton checked the beret one final time. No. Theo looked at the photograph, then at his father in the mirror. Liar. Elton didn't turn around, but something in his shoulders moved, just slightly, just enough. "Yeah," he said, a little. Stood, walked over to his father and looked at the ribbon bar with the focused attention he gave to things he was taking seriously. He reached up and smoothed the edge of one ribbon that had lifted at the corner. "Barely," he said. But still, he stepped back, looked at the full picture, the dress uniform and the eagles and the ribbons and the beret and the new patch and everything that 22 years had put there. Dad. Elton met his eyes in the mirror. "You look like a colonel." Elton looked at himself, at all of it, at what it had taken to still be standing here in this uniform on this morning after everything that parking lot had tried to take from him, at the thin red line on his wrist that had faded weeks ago, and the memory of it that hadn't. At the cracked phone screen he hadn't replaced because Theo's text was still the last thing on it, and he hadn't wanted to lose it somehow, even though he knew that wasn't how phones worked. At his son standing behind him. "I am a colonel." Theo nodded, looked at the photograph one more time, set it on the dresser, see the CJOTC uniform, the salute, the serious face of a boy honoring a moment. "I know," Theo said. He sat back down on the bed. "I just like saying it. Outside, the December sky over Fort Liberty was very blue and very clear. The kind of morning that makes everything look sharp-edged and specific. The kind that asks something of you just by being what it is. Elton took one last look at the mirror. Then he put his cap under his arm, picked up his briefcase, and walked out the door.